I have a PhD in psychology, specializing in hiring methods. A
Okay.
half century of research on hiring methods suggests if you ask people hypothetical questions in interviews, you get hypothetical answers that aren't necessarily that useful.
Hiring good people and building great teams is often considered the most important aspect of any organization. And that's why I'm excited for today's guest. Hi, I'm Joshua Carlsen. In today's Ask an Expert segment, I'm going to be sitting down with Geoff Smart. He's the founder of a leadership advisory firm called ghSMART. The great thing about them is they practice what they preach. They were actually just voted by Vault the #1 consulting firm in the world to work for. Geoff's also written a book called Who. He wrote it over a decade ago, and yet it's still the top-selling book in the entire world when it comes to hiring practices. Now let's hear what Geoff has to say. Geoff, thank you very much for coming on our Ask an Expert segment.
It's great to be here, Joshua.
Okay, so I want to start off with obviously as a nation and honestly as a globe, we've gone through a lot in these past few months. But the big issue right now is the social issue. I want to give kudos to you guys. You guys stepped up and have actually acknowledged that you want to do more as it pertains to diversity within your own organization. I'm curious about your thoughts. It's kind of been taboo from a corporate standpoint to talk about race, to talk about these very sensitive issues. And yet that's kind of door is wide open now. And so it's good to see people stepping up, but I want to talk about like, hey, what do we do organizationally to not just be responsive, but to really focus on being progressive now?
Sure. Yeah. Let's see here. So I'm very pleased by the progress this year and in the recent weeks around elevating the priority of diversity and inclusion in the corporate world. So we have ghSMART, the firm I run, and then our clients. We have a few hundred clients, mostly large corporations around the globe. And I think that about maybe the best quartile of them, the best quarter of them, have done a good job all along at diversity and inclusion. But sort of the next 75% certainly are elevating the priority. And I think they're looking at really three places, and this might be helpful for your listeners and viewers here. The three places to look to make meaningful improvement, I think, are in the culture internally. So your business, it's either inclusive and welcoming of folks from all backgrounds, or it's not.
Right.
There's surveys all over the place you can do to survey your folks and to measure your culture's inclusiveness. So I think starting with data and then really letting the data push you forward to be more and more inclusive is one place to focus. The second place is around recruiting, of course. So making sure you're tapping the talent markets from folks from diverse backgrounds. It requires energy and deliberateness. It sort of doesn't always happen on its own. So that's the second bucket of three. And then the third one is around the products and services that you're offering. So whatever it is you're offering, if you can thread in better inclusivity and diversity messaging to be like part of your products or services, I think all three of those places can really move the results forward.
Okay. And you used a word, and it's deliberacy, right? Like being deliberate about it. And I think that is the difference, at least for me, that I'm feeling is organizations are actually, and individuals are much more focused, like, hey, we have to be deliberate about this. It's not enough to just say, yeah, that sounds good, or we agree with that, but you have to step up and be deliberate.
I think that's right. Yeah, that's right. It's basically, it takes energy to include and to create a great diverse workforce. And I think there's, I had read actually in this book, A Great Place to Work for All by Michael Bush. His firm does all those great companies to work for surveys that Fortune uses to rank like the best 100 companies to work for in America. And we just recently added Michael to our advisory board, and we love his perspective on the cultural part of all this. And he said something like, there are 22,000 studies by now that show that a more diverse workforce leads to higher revenue, bigger market gains, more innovation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like the business case is already there, and then obviously the human case is hard to argue against too. So there's sort of no good reason to not prioritize making meaningful improvements in diversity and inclusion for leaders of all types of businesses today.
Well, and that's a good takeaway because I think that is something that is kind of undermissed. Like it is business smart to be more inclusive,
Right.
and that did unfortunately that is missed. But it's common sense, really. But I'm glad there's 2,200 or
What?
22,000 surveys.
Yes.
Yeah, right, right. Okay, so my next question: you guys obviously you help companies with leadership and hiring. I want to talk about the hiring side. We've obviously gone through an interesting period, in the educational system. Fortunately, a lot of college graduates, didn't get the celebration that they were hoping for. But that's a short-lived thing. Careers are long-term. So, what's the advice to college graduates or college students looking at the labor force right now?
Sure. So I have a couple of pieces of advice you haven't heard before. Maybe just I prepared some thoughts for your
Okay.
audience here. So if you're just going into the labor force, you're a college grad and an MBA grad, or just a young professional. Um, Here are a couple thoughts. So companies are hiring. So doing your research to figure out which industries or which companies are actually doing fine and hiring, I think matters a lot,
Right.
rather than, I wanted to work in hospitality or really wanted to, work for a cruise, ship company. It's like, well, okay, maybe that dream, can still be achieved, or maybe you should widen the aperture a bit to consider other industries or subsegments. So that's common sense. Here are the two nuggets for you. I think working on expanding your network very deliberately and rapidly is really important in this day and age with all the digital tech we have. Um, uh, Unfortunately or fortunately, people are still hired very much on relationships. So
Right.
if I had a recent college grad son or daughter, I'd say, hey, um, make a list of the people you either know or want to get to know who are good potential bosses, people who work in either the industry you want or the couple of industries you want. Have mentor conversations. It's easy to call someone up and say, hey, I'd love to pick your brain on XYZ. I'm a student at such and such. Would you make time? I, my entrepreneur friends, and yours too, probably CEOs of huge companies even, actually make time
Yeah.
for students who want to have an information interview and a mentoring chat. So go for that. Line up mentoring chats, and then those can lead to intros and
Sure.
jobs. A second, even more ninja tactic is, if you're really motivated, do a study of something, some topic, collect research, do interviews, collect data, and meet people, and you'll have plenty of job opportunities. A million years ago, when I started my firm, ghSMART, it's actually 25 years ago, I was a grad student. I was doing a PhD dissertation on a certain topic, which was how venture capital investors evaluate the entrepreneurs that they invest in. And
Sure.
I got to meet dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of interesting venture capital investors and board members and CEOs through the research. And then we decided to start a company. And then we went right back to that same network to, reveal the results and do seminars and do speeches and that kind of thing. So doing like a research project on a given topic in a given industry, I think is another ninja tactic for getting a job in this environment.
Well, I like both of those. Fortunately, I had a ninja mentor, I guess, early in my college career, and they encouraged me to do that, right? To go out for those informational interviews and just sit down and talk to peers in the industry or field that you're studying in, because it did open doors, and that was a huge benefit. But I like the second one, specifically, do a study, because not only are you meeting these people, but you have something tangible that's actually really meaningful when you go and talk to somebody. Maybe that the door wasn't open for you; you had to knock from the outside. You've got something of value to show, and that's a tremendous benefit coming in, especially for a college student.
Definitely. And someone gave me the advice once, which is, narrow your question or your area of expertise so narrowly that you could become, kind of like a world expert on something. And
Right.
whatever that is, if it's a topic or a question of interest, then it's great. It makes it easy for them to think, oh, Joshua's the such and such person. He's an expert in a certain thing, yet we should, hire him into our company.
Perfect. Okay, so flip side of this, organizationally, there's a lot happening right now. Companies are suffering. There have been layoffs, furloughs. The talent pool seems like it's pretty rich right now. How do organizations efficiently find good talent that fits kind of their organization and culture?
Yes, weirdly, and this is just my experience, but I'm in kind of an interesting perch because we serve all these these companies around the U.S. and the U.K. and some globally. But great companies are still full of talented people, and they're kind of not going anywhere necessarily. So I don't have the sense that, oh my gosh, with 13% unemployment in the U.S., you could have the pick of the litter. If you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to grow your business. So I think the normal rules kind of apply, I guess. So if you're a company, entrepreneurial or larger scale company, we have these 4 steps to good hiring that used to be relevant, are still relevant, are going to be relevant in the future. And I'm happy to hit those, but yeah, I guess it's like if you're a strong company, in a pandemic, in a recession, sure, at the margin you have a little bit more power to bring in some folks who you might not otherwise be able to get, but that's really just part of the problem. The biggest part of the problem is assessing people accurately, making sure there's a good culture fit, that kind of thing.
Okay, so let's talk about that assessing, because I've heard multiple factors. There's no, well, there probably is a right way to hire, but there's a right way to hire for your organization and for what it is you guys are doing. What is the recommendation to evaluate? Because I think, I know personally, I've made tons of poor hires. I've made some really great hires, but I know that it would have been better if I could have been more efficient or better, at that process.
You bet. So yeah, there are a few best practices for hiring that I'll tell you right now, and then there are lots of practices that don't work so well. That some of the fun ones that don't work so well that are actually out there are trying to stress out candidates. So I was at you're in EO, right?
My colleague.
Okay,
Andre.
got it. I was doing a global EO event once, and a gentleman in the front row told me that he has like a great way of getting a sense for someone's character quickly. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, what I asked them to do is like, sell me this pen. And then what you do is you pick up their resume and you say, I don't see anything on this resume that's impressive. Why should we hire you? And so his assumption was, if you really stress out the candidate, you can really get a sense for what they're like. And unfortunately, I then asked him, how successful his approach has been. And he admitted, well, it's oftentimes difficult to get people to come back for a subsequent interview after going through his sort of brutality fest. So, that's not good. Asking people hypothetical questions is not good. This is very common practice, Joshua, out there. If you watch a bunch of interviewers on an average Tuesday, they're going to ask candidates, how would you do this? How would you do that? And I have a PhD in psychology, specializing in hiring methods. A half century of research on hiring methods suggests if you ask people hypothetical questions in interviews, you get hypothetical answers that aren't necessarily that useful. So watch out for that. So those are like what the don'ts are. The do's are, do these 4 things, and you can increase your hiring success rate from 50% success, which is kind of considered the average, to 90% success. And here are the 4 things. So 1, you write a scorecard before you start interviewing people. The scorecard is like, what's the mission for the role? What are some outcomes you expect the person to achieve? What are some of the competencies that are important for either this job or for your culture? Stuff like that. Just basically having a written down set of criteria is step 1. Boom. Step 2 is sourcing talent. Like, so how do you source talented, diverse people? Like, how do you do it? That's oftentimes one of the most common questions we get asked. It's just like, how do you find how do you create a stream of good candidates? And so, a number of ways to do that. A couple of ideas are paying your employees referral bounties for finding good folks from all backgrounds. That's only about 15% of entrepreneurial companies, and probably about 60% of bigger companies offer that to existing employees. So that's a really good way to get candidates. Using your own network is good, but you have to be mindful of not just tapping people who look and act just like you, but a nice diverse network of folks asking for who's the very best CFO we're trying to hire, that kind of thing. So that's like the sourcing step. The 3rd step is called select, and that's where you have the interviews. And the interviews that work the best, we've found over 2 decades of doing this, and what all the research also suggests is interviews where you really measure what someone has done are way better than interviews that measure hypothetical answers to hypothetical questions. So, we could talk more about that, but basically if your goal is, hey, I really want to get to know this person and find out what they've actually done, how they've done it, what they accomplished, what they didn't do well, how they worked with different bosses and peers, why they left their jobs, that kind of data is really good. It's predictive of how they're likely to perform on the job.
Okay.
And then fourth and finally, we call the sell step. Sell, so like just because you've decided to hire someone doesn't mean that you've hired them yet. You still have to sell them. So, but entrepreneurs, do you have a mostly entrepreneurial audience base, Joshua?
Yeah.
So entrepreneurs are good at this step. The corporate types and the government leaders we work with, sometimes they have to like really focus on the sell step. But entrepreneurs are selling constantly. So yeah,
Right.
once you decide to sell someone, we found people take jobs based on fit, freedom, family, fortune, or fun. It's like one or more of those 5 things makes people accept a job. So just, kind of be mindful of them as you're trying to sell someone on saying yes to your job. And if you follow those 4 steps, I mean, they're pretty straightforward. People who follow these 4 steps achieve hiring success 90% of the time.
90%, right.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. It's like, imagine 9 out of 10 of your hires working out pretty well. Like, that's awesome versus only 5 out of 10.
Yeah. So question on the sell part.
Yeah.
So it's part of the interview process to assess which one of those 5, or, maybe it's a handful of those 5, so that when you get to that sell part, you're able to kind of position the company.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely. So the in-depth interviewing allows you to learn stuff like, why did people take jobs in the past? What did they like and not like about their previous bosses and peers and cultures and all that? Like, it's the data you get makes it, I think, super easy then later to go, oh, this person's into autonomy and they're very creative. And if you give them autonomy, they perform at their best. Hey, guess what? Our firm, is big on autonomy, big on freedom. We have a creative vibe. You should come join us, like that kind of thing. Or the opposite. Oh, this person really does well in a very structured environment and has failed in the past in more unstructured environments. And let's say your environment's pretty structured. Hey, Joshua, come to this firm. We have some structured methods. There's a method to the madness. You're gonna love it here. That kind of thing.
Okay. So next question, we're talking about video. Geographically we're separated, so I'm not sure there would be a good way for us to have this conversation. But video has been thrust into everybody's life. And notably from a business standpoint, I think previously the closest that most organizations would do would be a screen share, right? I've got a deck and I want to walk you through it, but I'm off, right? You're not seeing my face. Well, suddenly this facade that we've all had, I don't like how I sound, I don't like how I hear. Well, reality, that's what you sound like. That's what you look like. So it's been thrust. What do you see, or how do you see businesses should be looking at using video, both internally and externally, kind of moving forward?
I think there's going to be a bounce back to the norm after this pandemic's done, but it won't be a full bounce back. I think people have had enough of a taste for the value of video in saving time and improving interactions. So this is usually stuff we say is based on science and facts and data. You're asking me a question I haven't thought a lot about, but if I were just to give an estimate, I'd say that we're going to use video sort of a third more than we used to going forward, just because it's valuable and everything's a cost benefit on time. And videos, it really is better than just talking on the phone even. For example, I had a meeting with 4 colleagues. We're working on a white paper, a research project that I learned through the body language of the video that my 4th colleague was not into it. And so it was funny, but I don't know that I would have been able to pick that out of a conference call. And it's not the kind of meeting we would have all gotten together for in person. So yeah, I think video is great. I think folks have gotten a sense for this is the technology is that good now. It is that easy to jump on a Zoom or a Google Meet or GoToMeeting or whatever. And I swear to gosh, my colleague, I was saying things like, so do you think we can hit that deadline? And he was saying the right things, but his face was kind of like this. He was like, kind of like that. And I said, colleague, you don't seem like you're that into this project. What's going on with you? And he said, you know what? The topic I thought I'd be more jazzed about
Right.
I'm not jazzed about it, and it's going to take too much time. I said, well, do you want to just, drop this project? And he said, yeah, that'd be great, actually. So yeah, I think video, you want to see, everyone. It's not like we'll never have meetings again, kind of
Sure.
thing. But I think you'll see a good solid third more video use in the coming years than we have been in the past.
Okay, well, that's a good takeaway. I mean, I know I'm clamoring to be able to get, belly to belly with somebody to get back to some semblance of normalcy. But I talked to another guest, and he said that they've been using video for almost a decade now. Anytime that they were going to make a phone call, they used video, and his primary driver was the people would stay in the moment and they wouldn't be distracted, because to your point, especially on a conference call, it's very easy to let, 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5 carry that call. I'm not paying attention. I'm not engaged. And, and you're really missing where video, on top of being able to see my face, on top of being able to see how, animated I am, you're actually in the moment. And that was a really powerful takeaway that stuck with me.
I love that. And here's a trick I've seen people use that's nice too. And I've been doing it a little bit on your podcast video here, like showing your hands so that it's also, I'm not even like, checking my emails or anything, but if you're on a conference call, I think 100.0% of people are multitasking. Whereas, if you're sitting here, you're listening politely, you see the 70% of communication that's nonverbal.
Right.
And then maybe like show your fingers like this, shows your video mate that you're not multitasking.
Right. Okay. So you guys have a term, and I want to make sure I get it right here, but it's to make sure the executive team is running at full power.
Yes.
And power is PWR, and so it's priorities, who, and relationship. Can you talk about that?
Sure. This is a huge finding. This is a cool thing. I think a lot of research can be boring if it doesn't produce any insight that's actionable. We did this research project for the book that ended up being Power Score,
Okay.
where the question was, what makes a successful leader?
Yeah.
And related, how does a leader lead a team successfully? So we I think at the time we had about 15,000 of these in-depth assessments of managers and executives, and so we had this like really great database. It was like it would cost $100 million to replace this database. Like, it's rare data, it's good data.
Right.
We gave it to the University of Chicago's Steve Kaplan and this professor and his team to analyze it, because we're like, we're not like consultants looking for something specific. We're going to give it to some legit university researchers to tell us what they found in their data. And what they found was, if you are good at 3 things, you are 20 times more likely to achieve your team's goals than if you're not good at all 3 of these 3 things. And it was weird because there are hundreds of things that could matter, right? Or
Right.
even thousands. Well, we found these 3 things that matter a lot, and what's neat too, I love this. They're different. Like, there's not a lot of overlap. But if you're good at all 3, you're 20 times more likely to be successful in leading your team. Yeah, it's a huge finding. It's a big deal. The 3 things are, you're good at prioritizing, goals and what are we focused on, what are we not focused on. If you're good at hiring the right people who are on the team, and then if you're good at building relationships that are focused on results. So prioritizing who's on the team and relationships, PWR. It spelled power, and we're like, whoa, it's like, how do you run a team at full power? You do the P, the W, and the R. And it's a nice shorthand too for if you're running, we've done this with companies that have like 100,000 employees, massive companies. We've done this with companies that have like 20 employees. But if you're asking as a senior team, do we have the right priorities? Well, what are they? And like, are there too many? Are there too few? Like, what are they? Let's discuss and debate. Do we have the right people? And do we have the right relationships? Those 3 key questions are just wonderful diagnostics for you to kind of take a temperature check on how well your team's performing.
And so is this a process, I assume this is a process for anybody kind of in management, that they're assessing and then realizing, oh, we have deficiency, maybe with the who's, and so we need to focus on, scaling up that proficiency
Yes.
so that we can get that benefit.
You're right. In fact, you picked the one that people most often struggle with. Let me check my numbers here so I don't tell you something wrong. But yeah, let's see here. So only 24% of leaders are good at the prioritizing part.
Okay.
Only 14% are good at the who part. That's the worst one.
Yeah.
And then good news, the relationship one was higher. 47% of leaders are good at building relationships. So yeah, you put your finger right on it. The middle one, the who, hiring and developing talented, diverse teams,
Yeah.
it is viewed as the hard one that others say is like the most important of the three.
Okay. So there's a lot of businesses out there today that are struggling. We've been hit with a perfect storm from across the board. What are the recommendations you have for businesses that are struggling, that can evaluate, where we are at? Do we need to pivot? Do we toe the line? What are the recommendations you have?
So if you're, unfortunately, like in an industry that's really getting hit hard, or just that, the current market climate is really rough, using that power framework we found is pretty actionable and helpful, which start with, okay, you're going to want to change your priorities. Like the
Yeah.
old playbook probably isn't the same playbook. And to me, priorities are things like, who's the customer? What products or services are paired with what customers? Priorities around what are our goals. Are we trying to expand internationally? Are we trying to just double down in a certain region in North America? Like, I think getting clear on priorities and goals is really hard, because you have to let go a little bit of the past. ghSMART, we're doing fine through the pandemic, but we were going to plan on European expansion from our London office this year, but we sort of held up on that because
Right.
not good timing. So you have to sort of let go a little bit of some of those priorities that you had your heart set on, and to really ask the question, what's most important today? So reset priorities is one. Two is the reset on the people part. People, you want to keep your team, and I think great leaders say things like, hey, look, let's be agile and let's shift as an organization, but let's really try to keep people's jobs intact. So that's the ideal. And within that, what are skill sets or new types of folks, or do you have like a whole bunch of people who are focused on the wrong market segments and they need to be shifted over here, that kind of thing. So getting your organization reset around the key priorities is the second big task for a struggling company. And then the third one is just basically like communicate more. So
Yeah.
our quarterly meetings have become weekly problem solving huddles. Like, you got to really tighten the cadence of assessing the environment, making decisions, monitoring progress, assess, make decisions, monitor. It just has to go quicker in times of crisis. And companies that shift to a tighter cadence of communication generally like it, and they say it's part of their secret to success and powering through a pandemic, for
Well, that
example.
makes sense, because I think that there's a lot of uncertainty right now. It's like today it's blue, tomorrow it's red, and just the consistency just isn't there in that uncertainty. And so to be able to communicate, especially, I mean, this is, for me, it feels unprecedented, and things are changing day to day. And so that communication is a huge factor. And I know organizationally for us, it's been a tremendous benefit to keep everybody calm and on the same page. And pivoting from that, but staying relatively close to that, is, I've had guests on here and they've been really focused on making sure the mental health of their employees, especially because we're not, distant, or we're not together, and we are distant, and we have Zoom fatigue, and Zoom, it's only being used for business. I don't have the water cooler talk anymore, so I'm not getting any of that. But the thing that I think often, the burden falls on that leadership. How do they maintain mental health when really, they need to be the foundation, they need to be the steady hand in the situation, but that's a lot of pressure on leaders.
It sure is, and I think part of it's sort of the mind, and part of it's sort of the heart. To steady the mind, I've found with our clients and with our own firm, doing the scenario planning early. What if revenue's up? What if revenue's down a little? What if revenue's way down? Like, what's the impact to budget, et cetera, et cetera. Doing just thinking through the worst case scenario to best case scenario, and
Sure.
just discussing and debating as a team, hey, what are we going to do, is nice then, because once reality happens, you kind of already have anticipated that, and you have that you have confidence that you have a playbook. So that's one. That's for the mind. And then for the heart, I don't know, scheduling off time's nice. Like schedule time where you're not you know, in the trenches, actively working hard, and you know, leaders who schedule some think time. Bill Gates is famous for taking a whole week every year while he was running Microsoft to just chill out and think and read a bunch and that kind of thing. So yeah, you know, smaller versions of that in times of crisis, but scheduling time to just have downtime to either relax or, you know, do whatever personally makes you happy, spiritual stuff, yoga, you know, et cetera. But if you don't schedule the time and you're just always in run mode, you can't really sustain that indefinitely.
Okay. So you mentioned you've been with this, you founded the company 25 years ago, I think it was.
Yep.
So you've seen a lot, you've learned a lot. What is something, if you could go back in time and you could tell that grad student, hey, here's something to look out for, or don't forget about this, that maybe, you know, would have helped you along the way?
Two things come to mind. One is getting going digital sooner would have been helpful. So my old sort of framework was, oh, let's hire really great folks and have really great methods, like the end. But now, and we're sort of playing some catch up, but having great folks, you know, following great methods, benefiting from this sort of systematic use of data and analytics, database management, predictive analytics. I don't know. In our defense, machine learning and AI wasn't quite as great 25 years ago as it is today. So maybe we're just, you know, coming into digital as the technology's gotten fabulous. But I would have done that a little sooner, just to be able to have even more robust insights, whether it's for our books or for our consulting work. So that's one. And the other is going international sooner, I guess, would have been something. Where in ghSMART is in North America and the UK right now, which is great. And we're growing well, and we have happy clients and happy colleagues. And I really feel very thankful and fortunate that the firm's doing as well as it is. But, you know, we're missing out on Asia, helping advise Asian leaders. We're missing out on South America, Middle East, Africa. So it would have been, you know, our credo, Joshua, is we exist to help leaders amplify their positive impact on the world. And that's great. The world part, we've been, you know, slower to expand than I would have ideally liked to have done. On one hand, on the other hand, we took a more conservative growth posture. So who knows? But yeah, it would have been nice to be a little more international, a little sooner. But that's what's in store for these, you know, coming 5 to 10 years.
So I'm interested, as you bring this up, from an international standpoint. Well, I love the credo, but as it pertains to the international aspect, and you guys are in the UK, Europe, are you seeing different ways that you guys approach clients because you are in a different culture? And obviously there's a lot of assimilation between UK and America. So it's not a huge reach, but it's Europe. It's a different environment. What are you guys seeing from that standpoint?
Yeah, so context, leadership context matters a lot, and the contexts of different cultures and countries, you know, it varies a fair amount. So for our business, we're in the business of advising leaders on hiring and developing talented, diverse teams, and then running them at full power. So it's very context dependent, picking leaders for teams, or the way in which communication happens in different cultures. For example, North American style cultures, it's acceptable, and, you know, where you have outspoken people and, you know, we ought to do this, and, you know, like that kind of thing. And so in that context, like, yeah, that can work, you know, that's all right. In you know, in some countries, it's very, very important that the leader, you know, gather input, and really kind of advance the collective more than, you know, going off on his or her own. So yeah, I think the context does matter a lot across countries. The secrets to success, I think, are stable, but the manifestation of them depends on local business customs and mostly around communication. But, you know, should you hire great people who fit well and are diverse and talented and good-hearted? Yes. You know, should you communicate? Yes. You know, but like all the how you do that, the how really does matter, and is different by country. So yeah, so there you have it. It's a matter of applying fundamental principles in the way in which the local customs, you know, can interpret and communicate them.
Okay. Is there anything else you think that we haven't covered that might be helpful to businesses right now?
I thought you stumped me on that question when you sent it ahead, and then I gave it some more thought. And really, it's around not just being an entrepreneurial success, but how to be happy with your life. It's a question we get asked a fair amount by leaders of huge companies or small entrepreneurial companies. And I had two thoughts for you, and that's it. Then you will have like wrung all the good advice out of me for this podcast.
I find that hard to believe, but go
Well,
ahead.
all right. We have a lot of hot air over here in this room, so happy to share. But I think so prioritizing family is super important, and that really means scheduling on your schedule, on your calendar, family stuff, and then not letting work sort of wash over it like a sandcastle, but really saying, hey, whether it's kid stuff or spouse stuff or significant others or extended family, or you're caring for a aging relative, people who schedule family time and stick to it are happier than those who just work and then like try to fit in family and the edges. So that's one. And two, kind of related, is I think entrepreneurs don't delegate as well as they should, and that's part of what makes us successful. Is we're detail oriented and we're going to take the hill and we're going to make sure everything is really great. But at some point, around 10 million in revenue and up, where you can afford a team, the name of the game changes dramatically, I think, from you being really productive and successful as an individual to being able to hire and delegate well. And if you can see that switch happen at 10 million in revenue, to infinity, and then really put your energy around hiring a great team, delegating, getting out of the spotlight, letting your team really play a leadership role, you can actually be successful and have a life outside of work. So that's something that doesn't get written a lot about or talked a lot about, but I'd love to encourage entrepreneurs as they hit even a small level of scale and beyond to really work on the hiring and delegating piece, because then you can have all the fun of the work and your successful business, but then find you have tens of hours freed up in your week that you didn't think you'd have for whatever else is important in your life.
Sure. I think those are both good, because I think that, when you're working in a corporate environment, if you decide to stay late, you're just not there. But when you're working from home right now, like a lot of us are, when your children or your family, you're just ignoring them because you are there. You're present, but you're not present in their lives. And that's something that's really important, that work-life balance. So that's a good one. And your second one, it reminds me of, I got to talk to Howard Bihar, and he talks about, when you tell somebody, hey, I would like you to sweep this room, you don't tell them what kind of broom to use. You gave them the task. You hired them for this task. Let them do it. Let them go do it. Don't be. And he said that was an important aspect of being able to help them scale at Starbucks.
That's great. I really appreciate that. There is some theme of great companies, hiring well and then really believing in their people to take good care of customers and take good care of each other.
Right.
And it does require this weird letting go kind of thing. And I think some entrepreneurs mistake that for tolerating mediocrity or like not, driving a really high expectation. It's like, nope. What it's allowing is for people's natural sense of leadership to sort of rise to the occasion and take pride in their work. And in the wonky world of industrial psychology, it's called Theory Y, Theory Y management, where you hire well and you believe in people and then you kind of trust they're going to do a good job. Theory X management, in contrast, is where maybe it's less about hiring and more about micromanaging people.
Yeah.
I think in this day and age, the knowledge workers that make up so many jobs, shouldn't be excessively micromanaged if you really want to build a world-class organization. And by the way, the most talented, driven, awesome folks don't want to be micromanaged. So the more, it's a weird feeling, but like the more you can hire well, have some sense of direction and strategy for sure, but then just kind of quietly smile back and support and listen. That is what modern day powerful leadership looks like, more so than getting out in front and always having to have the spotlight.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I think, my takeaway here is, if entrepreneurs and business leaders that are, watching this, there's an opportunity for them to leverage the good insight that you talked about as it pertains to hiring because it's when you do get those good people that you can comfortably take that step backwards. But it
right.
starts first, getting those people that fit the culture, that fit the organization. So.
Well said.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on. My best to you, your family, and your entire organization. And I look forward to having you back again. Ideally when you're back in that expansion mode to see how you're going. More
Thank you.
international.
Thanks, Joshua. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.